guys, I want to share a very, very personal video with you while I'm on this journey. A couple of years ago, I suppose I'm not even sure that this video version of this story will actually make it onto the video. I might do a different version, but if not, if I decide to upload it anyway, hopefully for that, maybe that one individual that watches it that might know what I'm talking about. Hopefully you don't feel alone. Hopefully you don't you can see a way out of it. And so what I want to share with you is that a couple of years ago, I think it's about 2 years ago now, around the time that I went with a rebrand on my business, I had a bit of a breakdown. And I don't mean just a bit of a breakdown, I had a mental breakdown. Everything in my life was coming undone at the seams. And it was a really, really difficult time to go through. Nobody really understood what was going on up here. Nobody understood the outlook that I had. I didn't even understand a lot of my outlook or why I was thinking a certain way or all of that type of thing. My business was struggling. At the point where I was doing the rebrand, the business was doing better to be able to reinvest into the business. And that was a huge, huge relief financially. And yet, still, I had a mental breakdown. For my whole life, you know, I'd been listening to people and their views and opinions, and I was always trying to live up to other people's expectations. I failed miserably at that. And what came hand in hand with that failure was guilt. Because I had this expectation of myself that was influenced by the expectations of others. Now, people who have expectations of you, whether it's family or friends, generally have high expectations. You know, they want you to do well, they want you to be happy and thrive and all this type of stuff. But unless you can find your own path of what makes you happy and what kind of a person you want to be, a lot of the time, in my case, I had this perception that I was making decisions for myself, that my goals and aspirations were being set for myself, but these were being influenced by others, which is absolutely fine. It's what happens in life. But whenever I was failing at those expectations, it really wore me down. Now, my mindset was very, very crooked, wrong. It wasn't the right perspective to have. It was a very negative one. It was a very critical one, a very toxic one. And that only fed into itself. It created the same situation over and over again. With those difficulties, my expectations of other people were set high and not met. And so that type of thing can have a real impact on the likes of relationships, family, business, personal growth, all that type of stuff. Now, a lot of my information from 2 years ago that I made videos on when I was talking in the van was different parts of that journey, trying to find a way through the aftermath, if you want. Now, when I went through the actual breakdown itself, my communication with people all but shut down. My wife and myself were really, really struggling. I wasn't a very reasonable person, I don't think, in a lot of my approach with how to deal with the difficulties that I was facing. I was expecting people to support me in certain ways that ultimately I really needed to support myself. Struggled when I came home I really struggled when I came home to be a happy dad. I struggled to be a good husband. I struggled to be a happy husband. I struggled with my business. I struggled in a lot of ways that really, it just crippled me. So I think the actual breakdown itself I had, initially when I couldn't cope anymore, I think the first couple of days were the worst, but it took about 2 weeks to come out of that hole. And I don't mean that I came out the other end within 2 weeks. I mean it took 2 weeks to get out of the actual experience of the breakdown itself before I could openly and easily have a conversation with other people, before I could speak with my wife about how I felt, about what was going on inside my head. And that was a very, very difficult time. That was kind of like where I was doubting myself at every step of my journey. I was comparing myself to other people, and in looking at maybe what I perceived as their success was making me feel all the more insecure about what I was actually achieving. And there's a lot of positives in our lives when we look at it, but whether we see it or not really depends on our perspective. So when I was going through my breakdown, it was like every part of my personality, every part of my mentality was just imploding. Nothing seemed to support another aspect of anything. And the only thing that was working at the time for me was that I was trying to figure out a better way to be a better version of myself. And it took about a year in total, I would say, and I'm still on the path to recovery if you want, but it took about a year before I could actually see the light at the end of the tunnel for me. Now, I'm sure that there's plenty of people that you can turn to for support. There's plenty of people, doctors or specialists, that might be able to help medicate you to get through it. I didn't choose that route. I wanted to kind of find my way through the challenges that I was going through and find a better path for myself. It's a very vulnerable thing for me to share with you guys, because no one's perfect, and I feel extremely grateful that a lot of people in recent months have said, about where my business is now compared to where it was, about how they've seen some of my journey over the last couple of years, and how positive it is. And for me personally, it was a very very difficult journey personally, but I feel strongly about sharing it with you guys. because I feel strongly about sharing it with you guys, because for me, if it wasn't for being able to watch other people and them tell their stories and the difficulties that they went through, I wouldn't have found strength for some of those days. And I suppose ultimately at the end of it, while I was really determined to rebuild my mindset and do it in such a way that it would create a stronger version of myself, mentally anyway, it took a lot of work. It took a lot of analysing, it took a lot of reflection on trying to understand why I thought certain ways, why I did certain things, how I came across with certain people. And some of this information, this path of self-discovery, if you want, of trying to figure out who I am now, a lot of that information has come over the course of the last year. One major piece of my puzzle was the fact that I have ADHD. And for neurotypical people, see, a lot of people might refer to people, say, normal people. I like the phrase that a woman with ADHD she uses, and she refers to people as neurotypical. And what it means is that we're all unique and we're all different. And people with ADHD are wired different. So instead of like a channel thought running along a smooth line from one connection to the other thought process, people with ADHD can end up deviating into different patterns. And so their thinking isn't the same as everybody else, but they see things from a different perspective. This has proved to be both one of my biggest assets, personally myself, for my own reflection, but it's also been one of the biggest challenges of my life that I didn't realise. And so being able to piece together the bits and pieces of the puzzle of understanding why I had that breakdown, having ADHD answered a lot of questions, but also the environment in which you grow up in is one that you inherit. It's not one that necessarily your parents plan specifically for you, because they inherited their mindset from their parents and their upbringing, and they try to tweak it and make it better for their kids, the same as I'm doing for my kids. So my kids at the moment, they're growing up and they're subjected to the environment that I create at home. So if I'm creating an unstable environment, they're going to grow up with issues. If I create a lack of self-awareness or self-respect, they might grow up without those, without those qualities. And so, understanding both why I thought, how I inherited certain lines of thinking, why I perceive whether is money too hard to obtain, is business too hard to make a success, are relationships hard to maintain or to thrive or anything like that. All of those things came into account. It's not just the case that I had ADHD, but there was a huge element to it. And then how did I form certain thinking patterns? Why did I think of certain things as challenges and all that type of stuff? So for me personally, it took an awful lot to put the puzzle back together. And this time round, I understand a lot more of the image that I'm looking at, the bigger picture. But going through a breakdown was the hardest thing ever. for me. It made me reassess everything, and then try to put in place now better strategies, better thinking mechanisms to make the journey much more enjoyable. And out of that journey of the breakdown, I feel much more happier, much more content. Worst experience of my life. Worst experience. But also, I don't want to kind of put it in the wrong context, but it was the most rewarding. It's not something that I would have chosen to go through, ever. But the answers that came out of that, you know, what came out of the ash afterwards was something much more better for me, much more happier in my own skin. I understand my environment better, I understand my thinking process better, I understand my connections with people better. So while I make videos and I can speak to a camera about my thoughts, it's great, because although I know you're on the other side of the camera, watching this on your phone or on your tablet or on your computer screen, right now it's easier for me to converse with this camera, even though I know you're there. Now, if you were here physically and we were exchanging a conversation, I might struggle a bit. I talk way too much when I'm nervous. It's part of a thing with ADHD to try and control the uncontrollable, if you want. So, looking at where my situation was, the difficulties I was going through, a lot of things led up to a breakdown. And it was the worst experience of my life, as I've said. But on the flip side, coming out, figuring out a way to move forward positively. Give me a second, I'll speak about this again in a second. Alright, hold your horses, I'm only driving around the car park. On the flip side of what I went through, it's not something I would wish on anybody, but it's also something that I didn't share with hardly anybody as well. We never put a label on it before, but what was interesting was speaking with my wife and knowing what it was, looking back on it, it put such a strain on us as a couple that we're lucky we survived it all, and we're stronger now, much stronger now. And a lot of that is down to me understanding my own thoughts and processes and thinking, all of that type of thing. So I wanted to kind of share this story with you because for me, I know that, 5 minutes ago, I could really feel the emotion about how this really makes me feel. But I think it's really important as well. I think it's more important for somebody who's going through something like this, especially in our industry. I say our industry, we're in the service industry. So it doesn't matter what trade you're in. If you're in the service industry, a lot of us are isolated out on the road on our own. A lot of us we're not able to have somebody with us to be able to keep motivated, to be able to keep our spirits up. A lot of that stuff is self-reliance. And over the last 2 years, I've managed to build on my own strengths in order to be able to maintain that kind of support, if you want, for myself. and I've managed to learn how to get support elsewhere, and different things that work for me personally. So it's a very personal thing to share with you, this story. I'm not even sure that, that I wanted to share my version of the story and put myself out there for people to see. But if you who are watching this, if you're ever having those difficulties, it gets better. There's no easy fix to something like this. But create a good environment for yourself. Don't criticize yourself too much. Look at the accomplishments that you do make on a daily basis. I talked about in a video before about how, I can't remember the exact title of it, but I remember talking about the points of, looking at your journey from where you are now and where you've come from. See, rather than looking at where somebody is on their track, their personal journey or path, we tend to compare sometimes, and that can be really negative impact on ourselves. But as I was going through my recovery period, I kept on looking back at where I was and where I am now. And even when I made that video, looking back to that then and where I am now, it's quite a thing. It's quite a big leap. It's miles and miles apart from where I was. And so where I was with my breakdown and where I am now are two completely different places. Now, I'm not saying I'm successful. I'm not saying I've made it or I've figured it all out. But I am in a much better place, a much happier place, a much more contented place as a result. And if you're ever feeling like you've ever went through a breakthrough, or you're going through a breakdown, if you're ever having those difficulties, I know what it's like, and I just want you to know that. And there is a way through it. It's painful, but you will come out a stronger person out the other side. And that is extremely hard to try and encourage someone when you're going through it. Nobody can guide you step by step of the way, because everything is just so raw and intense. So I just wanted to share that with you. Thumbs up, thumbs down, doesn't matter. That's my story. Thanks very much for listening. See you in the next one.